has been deeply embedded, in fact, living in USA for 4 years during the last 10 or 15 years. So very heavily connected to and committed to the USA market. And since moving back to Australia, working with me in the export operation. So two guys who are up to our eyeballs in this wine company for a very long period of time. As I think some of you know, Justin celebrated 24 years with the company yesterday.
Institutionalized.
That's a worry, isn't it? And in fact, I just crossed the 14-year mark only last week or the week before as well. So yeah, we've kind of been in this thing for a long time. I've been in the wine business since 1984, in fact, which makes me a bit of a fossil. But I've been living in Australia for over 25 years and working with Taylor's Wakefield wines for the last 14, and it's my kind of wine company. I've a long time ago decided I didn't want to just buy and sell wine. I wanted to work for wine producers, and during the period of my life I've been doing that. I've worked with some of the biggest and I've worked with some of the smallest, and I way prefer working with family businesses who've got a real focus and a real connection to their land and to their vision of what it is that they are trying to do and what it is they are succeeding with. You get a very different feel for the wines that come out of family wine businesses. So in that context, working with the Taylor's family is every day a pleasure. And an exciting opportunity to continue to stretch and expand with them into their futures and into their dreams. So I'm going to hand over to Justin to tell a bit about that family story. We are not going to particularly follow your presentation, but everything we will talk about is reflected in the presentation that you guys have got in front of you. As a sales tool, I always think these things are terrible if you slavishly try to recite them in a meeting. They're far better if you think of them as reciting a joke or an amusing anecdote, as they say in Pulp Fiction. You can therefore take the facts of these stories as we relay them to you and layer them into your own memory as to how then you recite these stories to your customers when you're talking about the wines. So I'm going to hand over to Justin to tell you a bit about his family and how we came to be here, which is you've got about 5 minutes to do 50 years, if that's all right.
Yeah, not a problem, because you're on mute. So I'll jump into it. Yeah, look, I did the 4 years in the US. I think out of the 50 states of the US in the 4 years, I think I visited at least 30 of them, selling wine in 20 to 30 states across the US. So, and loved it. My fourth born child is an American. So we had Saxon Taylor when we were living in the US. And I don't know what it is with Saxon Taylor, but the other day, I was chatting to him and I sort of said, well, son, you know, when you're 18, you'll have to give up your American citizenship and you know, take up Australia. And he said, oh, Dad, no way, I'm sticking with the USA. And I was sort of like, gee, I don't know what's going on. And I think it could be a whole basketball LeBron James thing. I don't know what it is. But anyway, so 4 of the best years of my life was certainly with my wife and children in the United States. And we achieved a lot. We did a lot of work on the road, a lot of big distributor presentations. So from the little intimate ones in Alabama with 10 of you around a room to doing Fedway in New Jersey with 300 people in the room, sort of stuff. So can relate to what you're doing. So again, I would always say with Neil and I, and you've got Jeff Sidron as your lead, but if you want the direct connect with any of us, we're just at the end of a phone or we're just at the end of a Zoom, you know, like just reach out to us, because we very much want success and we very much feel connected to you guys. And we're both busting to get traveling again. So we will be in the US at some point in the near future. Our vaccinations roll out really soon. So we're keen. So page 2 of the deck, I'll try and stay on the deck just to give us a tiny bit of structure. As Neil said, I'm going to pick out the bits that I think are of relevance to everybody, and then, you know, feel free to, and do jump in and ask questions. We're time poor, but jump in. Look, as far as the passion goes, you're going to see it. Eventually, you guys will start to get out to Oz, and you'll see the passion in this organisation. It's a family-owned organisation, 5 decades into the story, and you just have to see, particularly our people on the vineyards that the family owns. 1,800 acres under vine, one of the biggest continuous vineyards in Australia. So the family is very much committed to the wine industry. We've got vines in the ground. We've got one of the biggest vineyards in Australia in the Clare Valley. The integrity, I think, does come from the fact that it is family owned, that you do put the region that you're from on the wines, and in different parts of the world you put your family's name on the wines. So that's 100%. I think the family story just tells of integrity and credibility, and it's a very real thing that you can point to. Eventually, over time, you're going to get to work with numerous family members. My older brother Mitchell, CEO, travels in the business as well as I do, and from time to time, Clinton, general manager of production. I think later in the presentation we'll get into terroir. I think one of the big things about us that makes us unique is the terroir of Clare. We're expanding outside of Clare now to Limestone Coast and various regions, but we're very regionally specific with the wines, expanding that story a bit with recent vineyard purchases outside of Clare. But there's a really good in those 5 points. There's just a lot of honesty, integrity, and truth behind this brand. We've found through COVID, where our wines, our sales have spiked in different parts of the world. It's again because consumers, where the brand was a little bit more mature, there was a lot of trust in the family brand and the family's product. So really important. I'll go on to the slide that has the heading estate, and this is where I'll start to cut Neil in on the presentation as well. But it's a big vineyard in the Clare Valley. Clare, one of the premium regions of Australia, and I think it makes a real point of difference that you can point to a home and a place that makes us very, very authentic. Neil will jump in a minute. For me, when I think of our estate, and this is going to sound a bit wine geeky, and we don't want to get it, but the one I do jump into is beautiful rich red terra rossa soils over limestone. So fantastic soils for viticulture. We get Murray-Darling water pumped into the place. So we've really got high quality water coming into this huge vineyard. And then what's really unique about us is this diurnal temperature shift. So we get, in the hot Australian summers, it's nice and dry in Clare, but we get these dry days, and then we get these cool nights. So it's just it's a beautiful place for viticulture. And for me, when you tell that story of our estate, then it's like, so what does that mean? You know, what does that translate into? And I still think it's the beautiful soft tannin structures in our wines. A lot of my friends over the years have said, Justin, love your family's wines, but they did it to me again last night. I went to have a glass, I accidentally drank a whole bottle. And it really is, the wines they're food friendly, but they're also hammock friendly. You can get a book and a hammock with a bottle of estate Shiraz, relax, and you're in a very good place. So I do think the terroir of Clare, which is very unique to Clare, and then we have, you know, with a winemaking team that makes it even more unique for Wakefield Wines, delivers these beautiful wines that are food friendly but drink really approachable. Over to you.
That's very true. And you know, when we talk about that terroir concept, and I'm going to go back to you, Justin, and get you to actually tell us the story of the family's reasons for becoming grape growers and winemakers and their journey. I know we're time poor, but I think that's an important part of the story here, because people, if you're actually trying to define terroir, ultimately all of the great wineries of the world are defined by the people that stand behind the decisions that point the land in the direction of greatness or not. But certainly in that physical sense, when you look at we came to Clare for Cabernet, so I'll talk about a couple of other Cabernet reasons just to draw the comparisons. You know, think about Napa Valley and talk to anybody who's, you know, championing there, and they'll talk about the Rutherford Bench and those fabulous soils that are washed down from basically from the hills into the valley floor and give them the soil beds that are crucial to the Napa Valley. They'll talk about the fogs which roll up from and give the cooling effects that temper the ripening and allow for the hang time to give you the excellence in particularly Cabernet Sauvignons in that region. And similarly, if you go into Bordeaux, they'll talk to you about the gravel soils that are formed up on the banks overlooking the Medoc, overlooking the rivers from the Medoc, and they'll also talk about the cooling influence of the Atlantic and how the proximity to the ocean there is crucial. And in our case, as Justin touched upon it, you've got these ancient soils, which Australia it's the oldest dirt in the world. So you are talking about a country that is utterly geologically different to everywhere else on the planet, and very, very, very stable old soils that do not regenerate, have not had ice ages to create regeneration of soils. So when you talk about Bordeaux, you're talking about 15 to 20,000 year old soils. When you talk about the Clare Valley, you're talking about 650 million year old soils. And in that context, it's really important to find spots where there are deposits of high quality nutrient rich soils, because most of Australia is low grade nutrient poor. And it's in this terra rossa, these benches of red soil that have been moved up from ocean beds over millions of years to land above sea level, is where we find these pockets of excellence across South Australia, and Clare Valley is one of those terra rossa pockets. And then beyond that, we don't have proximity to the ocean. We certainly don't have fogs coming in from the Gulf of Carpentaria or anything like that. The Gulf of St Vincent. But what we do have is elevation. We sit up there at 250 meters above sea level, 450 meters above sea level, and we're getting from that, as Justin was discussing, that diurnal shift, the daytime and nighttime temperatures, which give us lovely hot days to ripen fruit, and then cold nights, which stop that fruit from then burning itself out and losing its integrity and flavor at nighttime. And you go through a long, nice, gentle ripening season to end effectively with the same effect of a long hang time to get tannin ripeness and flavor ripeness perfect in your fruit. So that's the technical geeky stuff. I'm now going to hand back to Justin, who is going to tell a little bit of his family story. So if we look at that next slide 5, you'll see a picture of 5 particularly handsome gentlemen. You can tell genetically there's something going on with what was in the water during the breeding process, because they just sort of got, actually it's going sort of oldest through to youngest, so they got progressively shorter as it went on. Maybe Mitch is sort of striding forward.
Yeah, look at all my hair. I got the best hair. Clinton's got good hair, I suppose. Mitchell's got the CEO role, so that clearly stresses him way too much. I'll stay with sales. Look, I think here just on the family journey here, and I'm going to go back to Neil's point about Cabernet Sauvignon. So the family, we were hoteliers. We were also distributing and bottling wine, a hookup with the distribution companies in South Australia for servicing the family's hotels. The Taylor Whelan family had 120 pubs in Sydney. It was the biggest privately owned hotel group. Pubs being, your corner pub, your Irish pub. They decided to sell all the pubs and get into winemaking. I think what's really pivotal, and it's just to stay on the Cabernet story that Neil was putting forward there, is that my parents, my uncle and aunt, with my grandfather's blessing in the late 60s, went over to Bordeaux several times. And I think this was absolutely critical to the whole path and direction of the family's business. They, particularly my father, who's 84 years of age, alive and kicking, getting a little bit grumpier these days, but very much alive and kicking, and it was all about Cabernet. If you took Dad to any fine dining restaurant in New York, gave him the wine list, he'd say to the som, don't worry about it, just give me a Cabernet. I want an aged Cabernet. He'd probably like it out of France, but give me an aged Cabernet. It's got to be 4 years plus. So he's a real cab guy. 1969, our first vines went into the ground. 73, our first Cabernet comes out. It wins gold medals like the Grand Slam of gold medals in Australia at every state capital show. Goes on with the Montgomery Trophy for best Cabernet in Australia. And still to this day, in that key $15 to $20 price bracket, our Cabernet, the estate cab, is the #1 selling cab in Australia in the price bracket. So the family has this big history in Cabernet Sauvignon. And I think around the world at the moment, with people going through their health trends and all that sort of stuff, and drink a lot more rosé, a lot more Pinot Noir getting consumed, I've noticed around the world there's a lot of action in the Cabernet space. So although Shiraz is very much Australia's grape, and very much, you'll probably get your listings, and a lot of it, they'll want to talk Shiraz with you. There's a big fat story around Cabernet Sauvignon with my family and our whole entry into the wine game sort of thing. So we sell more Shiraz around the world now. But for a long, long time in this country, we were known for Cabernet Sauvignon, and we still probably are at the end of the day. We sell more Shiraz, but in Australia, we're probably still known for our Cabernets. And I noticed we're going to finish the tasting with a Visionary, which is pretty nice. So that's some of the history stuff. Some of the other stuff is the innovative stuff, generational change, and we're very much, I'm generation 3. We're building for generation 4 and 5, and I actually think generation 6 is, one of my cousins had a kid the other day, so I think generation 6 is actually on the ground. So it's very much a business that's built for the future. I will just interrupt to say, look, I'm delighted to be with Taub Family Wines. When I got over there in 2008, I got the 2 Obama elections. We were with Brown-Forman at that stage. Brown-Forman then sold their wine division in the middle of the GFC. That was well timed. So in 2010, I was given the job of finding a new importer, and I was hot to trot for Palm Bay. They were that's the crew I wanted to be with, and to be then part of their specialty wine division, Taub Family Wine Group. I'm absolutely thrilled. This is sort of, for me, this was the match I wanted to achieve a long, long time ago. So I do think lots of synergy where we can do a lot of good work with you guys. So that was the history stuff.
Okay, let's move a little bit. I think we should have a drink. How about we get some Riesling in our glass, and then we can talk a bit about Clare Valley within the context of Riesling. Oh, they're shooting through the pictures now. We can do that if you want. If you want to throw up the image, I just think it's a terribly dry argument at 5 o'clock on a Thursday night to be listening to you and I go on about wine without having a glass of wine. And for us, morning tea will be served at some stage. So let's have a
cheers, everybody.
Cheers to everyone, and enjoy your night. We're going to talk about Riesling for 2 reasons. Firstly, it's the only white wine we're tasting, and therefore it's the only chance this wine has got of not getting obliterated by the others in the lineup. And second, because when we talk Clare Valley, we cannot talk about the Clare Valley without the Riesling commentary. The Clare is really amazing as a wine region because of this unique terroir. And a very sort of undulating sort of countryside, which effectively forms up. If you look, there's actually a map, which don't worry about going back onto it, but in your presentations, you will find a page that shows a map of the valley, and you'll see, as well as being a long, thin valley, you'll see it's a series of scoops of bowls in which the vineyard operators locate their vineyards and their wineries. And because you've got those literally bowl-shaped vineyard estates, then obviously some of those parts of the estate are facing east and some of them are facing west, which means you can orientate the planting of your vines to suit what you're needing for different varietal agendas. The west-facing vineyards are getting the heat of the afternoon sun, and so you're putting your best Shiraz blocks into the west-facing areas. And conversely, the east-facing vineyard slopes are catching that much more gentle morning sun. And so Riesling is able to thrive on those specific microsites. And a lot of people do sort of scratch their heads and say, how can you actually be growing and making trophy winning wines from a spectrum as wide as you get from dry Riesling through to full-bodied Cabernet Sauvignon and Shiraz. And it's because of that, the nature of the estates and very carefully thought through vine and varietal block location within sites that we're able to achieve that. In the case of Riesling and Clare Valley, it's probably the grape variety that was first embraced by the settlers back in the 1800s. Certainly for white wine, it's naturally high acid. In a climate like Australia's meant that they were able to grow the grape and ripen it and then ferment the wine to dryness, which was in the late 1800s was very much the Germanic style. It was only after the Second World War they started making wine sweeter out of Germany, typically. So the dry style is really a reflection of the settlement, the point in history in which the German settlers and the influence of the German settlers came through from Europe into both the Clare Valley and the Eden Valley and Barossa valleys. Where therefore they selected Riesling for their white wine expression. Stylistically, Australian Rieslings are diverse, but Clare and its sister region next door, the Eden Valleys, are the two most famous. And you're looking at an expression of Riesling which is quite unique. It's quite different to Germany. It's equally different to Alsace. You wouldn't particularly pick it to be anything connected to Washington State. If you're trying to get even close, you might sort of say it's somewhat similar to the wines of Austria, the Wachau and the styles of particularly Riesling, obviously, but also the sort of Grüne Veltliner styles, where you get that prickly, high acid, prickly, spritzy dryness running through the wine. So that's just a background, just to take a look at that wine, and then we'll come back and go through the rest of what we want to talk about. But just a lovely color to it. Riesling is a sun lover. It's a myth that Riesling is a cool climate grape variety. The only places it grows in Germany are the places that get all the radiated and reflected heat from the river. Everywhere else they're growing Müller-Thurgau for ripening reasons. Riesling absolutely needs sun and needs warmth, so it thrives in lovely warm days, and then those lovely cold nights allow us to retain that acid cut, which is essential. So when you take a look at the wine, it's got good color. Varietally, it really shouts out in the glass. The varietal expression that's coming out of this part of the world with Riesling is lime, citrus and lime characters, really quite clear and sort of chiming out nicely in this 2020 that I've got in my hand. You've got a background in that. Some people talk about minerality and chalkiness. There's certainly a touch to that. As they age, they take on a little bit of that gasoline, petroleum character, but I don't really see that as a common feature of young Riesling coming out of Clare. It's really only in much older age that becomes a major feature. But then when you try the wine, the obvious thing is the absolute crystal dryness of the wine, beautiful, high, nervy acid, real spike of freshness straight up front. And then in the palate, when I talk about citrus, to me it's like grapefruit, like the pith, the rind of a grapefruit. You get this sort of combination of juicy ripeness, but at the same time bitter dryness. So the gin lovers tend to enjoy these wines as well, because they have this lovely background bitterness as a sort of echo at the back of the wine, and yet this amazing sort of freshness and vivacity right up front. As a aside, last weekend, and I do this on a regular basis, we had friends coming around and we fancied a long drink, but we were cooking and preparing for them, so gin and tonics weren't the order of the moment. But what I did do was take a bottle of our Riesling, smashed it over ice in a tall glass with a bit of mineral water, and as a long drink in summer or late summer for us, it serves that as a very versatile aperitif, and that'll definitely take your friends by surprise if you try that out. I'm going to hand over to Justin to see how he feels about Riesling.
Oh, look at my story on it, because Neil's done it in such beautiful detail there. I think I did it about 10 years ago on Vancouver Bay with about 20 soms, and they gave us 2 oysters each, a little squeeze of lemon, and a glass of this Riesling. And I laughed. We all tried it. Everyone was sipping it. And I laughed and said, do I really have to speak to that? You know, and everyone laughed and went, is he going to speak to it or not? And I went, well, if you don't get that, you know, and again, the vibrant acidity, the lime, the lemon coming through. It was a beautiful day. The food match was just perfect. A little bit of lemon over the oysters, you know, it's put it in your tastings. For my 4 years in the US and my subsequent trips either side of those 4 years, it was always good to have this Riesling in the mix. We do a lot of red wine. We're famous for our reds. You're going to sell a lot more of the red wine than you're going to sell of Riesling. But it's that point of difference, that point of interest, particularly if you've got customers with half decent palates, they're going to identify it so easily and relate to it, sort of thing. So it's a nice little one to have in the pack it'll win people over very quickly at hello. Because of its simplicity, but it's joyous simplicity. Okay, what slide do you want to go to next?
We're going to move on, and I think we're about halfway through our allotted time, so we're going to get into actually tasting and moving through tasting, because otherwise you're going to be sort of sat up there at midnight still listening to us. But we'll continue to sort of tell and pepper through the stories of the winery and the company as we go along. So what I'd like you to, well, it depends how many glasses you've got in front of you, but if you only have the one glass, then empty that out one way or the other. Incidentally, with Riesling, as around the world, Riesling quality is known to age, and that is absolutely true of the Clare Valley expression of variety. We sell them young and fresh. I can be very certain that 10 years from now, if a bottle of that sort of turns up in the bottom of my cellar that I've forgotten about, I'll be very, very comfortable pouring that, and the acid in the wine will have held that together beautifully and allowed it to evolve and build as Rieslings do in bottle maturation. So from a trading point of view, that means that I don't know what vintage you guys are on at the moment, but if you've got a couple of years on the stock, it is absolutely no problem. And good sommeliers and good retailers will totally understand and get Clare Valley Riesling and be more than happy with that.
Neil, just so you know, we're enjoying the 2019, and if I can speak at least for us in the room here, it's showing beautifully. All the points that you noted, it's very vibrant and delicious.
Fantastic. Well, that is good to hear. Incidentally, 19 and 20 as vintages reflect the tail end of one of the longest, deepest droughts that we've had to wrestle with in a long time in this country. So it's a testimony to the Riesling grape variety that it's been capable of weathering those challenging climatic circumstances. So yeah, look forward to sending you the 2020, and the 2021 is in the fermenting tanks as we speak. We're going to move into Promised Land and to take a look at these wines. These are the two wines that you've just listed with Wegmans. I hope very much to see them listed with plenty of other retailers around the country as well. But well done, you guys, for getting us going with that sort of national or semi-national distribution with the Wegmans grocers. Promised Land, we'll talk about the name in a minute, but as a stylistic representation, it's a welcome to Australia. But our entry level, as we describe it, isn't what's the sort of grubby end of life in sort of tough retailing would describe as entry. So we don't come in at sort of rock bottom. We don't try to compete with the cheapest player in the pack. We come in at a modest price that then hopefully appeals to consumers to pick it up and try it. And when they get it in their glass, they get the over delivery on quality then that just blows them away. So we deliberately keep the spec high on these wines, and stylistically, in difference to the estate and above wines, we tone down the use of oak and max up the expression of variety and fruit. So the wines are dry, but the wines are certainly abundant in fruit flavor. What would you like to say about Promised Land?
Oh, look, on Promised Land, I always get blown over by Promised Land by how good they are for the price. I just, you know, I'm lucky enough to drink a lot of, you know, St Andrews and Jarraman, and occasionally I get even to sip on a Visionary. But it, you know, drinking that right now, and even with a nasty little head cold, and I'm not getting a lot of what I love in my wines is fruit. I have a younger palate, I suppose. I'm drinking more younger wines, and just that abundance of dark berry, you know, luscious fruit coming through. There's still, which I love in the family's wines, vibrant acidity is still pushing through in that wine. And it just, every now, you know, I end up drinking a Promised Land and I laugh and go, you should drink more of that stuff. You know, it's just, it's a vibrant wine. The Wakefield wines, as we've evolved over the 5 decades, we had more of a profile in the look of our wines that was more masculine, and Promised Land was very much about, and the look of that label and what have you was, you know, to appeal to the fairer sex. I always get very nervous even saying those words. So, you know, women on the call can make the decision around that, but it's also to get balance in our consumer, the profile across the portfolio. But yeah, I'm just enjoying the approachability and I'm enjoying the upfront fruit of that. And again, like all of our wines, Adam Egan's our chief winemaker, Australia's, I think it was 2006 winemaker of the year. I mean, we have some of the best winemakers in the Australian industry. So from $10 or $15 sort of price bracket that these will sit in, all the way through to the vig. I mean, the quality in the winemaking, I think, is really evident right from our entry-level wines in Promised Land.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Look, hey, and he did this to me. Justin just made that comment about we should drink more of these wines. When I was very early in the business here, we used to have an office in a different part of town. We used to go to the local Italian very regularly for lunch. It was referred to as Boardroom 3 for meetings. And we got quite used to going to lunch quite early on in our working relationship. I think I put on about 6 kilos before I realized what he was doing to me. But anyway, you know, I'm a master of wine. I quite like, you know, going to lunch and grabbing casually a bottle of St Andrews or whatever's going at the time, and living the dream a bit there. And we were going to lunch, and I said, all right, well, what we're going to take with us? And he said, oh, look, I'd really like to take this. At the time, it was our Shiraz Cabernet in the Promised Land range. And I said, really? I said, yeah, let's do that. And we took this Promised Land Shiraz Cabernet to lunch. You won't even remember doing this, but it was a real moment, because we sat down and it was spectacularly good with the bowl of pasta that we had. And it was a real, wow, that was absolutely the right wine for the moment. And we should not overlook what role these wines play, which is very much in the more casual dining, but certainly a role at the table with the right foods in the right moments. So that was a bit of a.
And I'll jump in. We've just poured the Cabernet for each other, so we'll roll onto the Promised Land Cab. And again, straight away, it's just the families. And I tell that story, you know, if Dad walked into a room and you'd said, Mr. Taylor, any wine you like, it'll always be a Cabernet, and it's got to be an aged Cabernet. And just in, you know, there's the Promised Land Cab, just the length of palate in it, the finesse in it, the balance of it. You know, we talk about Cabernet being a donut. Sometimes it can go missing in the middle. None of our cabs go missing in the middle. There's lovely texture all the way through. There's integrated oak on these wines. My father still owns the majority of the shares, so he gets to set some of the rules that no one messes with. Otherwise, they lose their employ very quickly. And all the cab goes into French oak, so that subtlety of French oak is straight away there. And then we'll just get the variations and the iterations of it as we go through the range.
Yeah. No, that's quite true. And I mentioned earlier an emphasis definitely on fruit with these wines, but that's not to say there's no oak. There absolutely is oak work in the wines. The thing about finish as well, and length on both the Shiraz and the Cabernet, and varietal expression. So that Cabernet's got that lovely curranty, cassis, and leafy richness on the finish. The Shiraz, if you sort of pause to think or go back and have another taste of the Shiraz, you'll see it's got that quite spicy, licoricey, long finish, which for a wine of its price is way more than most people are expecting. There's no sweetness in the wines. They are fermented dry. But what Adam does do with these wines, and he does it to some extent with the estates as well, but he does it a lot with these wines. In fact, he got the welders, the fermentation tank guys, to actually create this for him. It didn't exist as an industry standard, but he took an idea out of how to stir chocolate, which liquid chocolate that you can't stir with paddles. You stir it by actually putting bubblers into the bottom of your tank, which then puts bubbles up through the liquid, and because gas expands as it rises, what you do is you start off with a small bubble of gas at the bottom of the tank, and as it rises, it expands and breaks the cap at the top of the fermenting tank. All of this you're fermenting, so there's no air, so it's not damaging to the wine. But what it does do by breaking the cap in that fashion, it then causes all the grape skins to sink without heavy turnover and smashing of the skins. So you get a really gentle extraction and minimum tannins with maximum flavor. And particularly at this level, that technique and that aerating component of fermentation tanks is now known as the Eggins aerator. The guys who created it have actually named it after Adam, our winemaker. So that's in terms of how do we get that softness. There's no carbonic maceration. There's no sort of whole bunch or any of that kind of stuff going on. But what there is very clever winemaking, which is actually borrowing from the chocolate industry to figure out how to get gentle extraction of flavor without massive tannin expression. So that's what's going on. We're going to move on to the estate wines because we're going to keep this going at a clip. After we finish talking and get offline, you'll have the rest of your evenings to sort of go back and revisit these wines and ponder what we've said. And as Justin did say, if we don't get time for all the questions at the end, by all means, just reach out and we're on email or telephone or anything you like as far as answering further questions.
So when we jump into the estate range, so we're on estate Shiraz, for me, when I'm introducing it around the world, this is the history of the family. This is the original, is the estate range. I remember back in 2000, I think it was, when my father handed the generational change, handed the reins over to my older brother, was made CEO of the business. I was put in charge of sales in Australia and what have you. And the estate range was pretty well it. And then we introduced all these other ranges in the last 25 years, 20 to 25 years. But you still go back to this one, that this is the heart and soul. This is the epicenter of what the family did. So a real little piece of history here. They went over to Bordeaux. They looked at Bordeaux. What could they do? They came back to Australia. They went to virtually every wine region in Australia. They discovered the Clare Valley. They discovered this Terra Rossa soil, the terroir, all the stuff that we went through. And in went the biggest planting of Cabernet Sauvignon in the Southern Hemisphere at that stage. We now have more Shiraz than we do have Cabernet in the vineyards. But this one for me is the history of the family's whole journey in the wine industry.
Good Shiraz.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just double checking. He was talking about Shiraz and not Cabernet. Sorry, I just played a really rotten joke on Justin as he was talking then, because if you actually go through your decks, you'll find there is a picture of his two other brothers, Clinton and Mitchell. And so I just folded it up and I put it in front of the computer while he was talking, just to see if he could actually hold it together. So and I then realized it was actually distracting me, so I've taken it down now. Childish, I know.
Brother.
We were raving on there about the quality and the flavor in the Promised Land wines, but my God, what a step change when you then pay those extra couple of dollars to move up into the estates. And this is, for you guys, this is crucially important. This is the wow factor that I really want you to ram home with your customers. Actually, we almost get sort of blind to just how these wines step up. But you should always pinch yourself and say, well, how much more flavor can you get for the kind of money we're asking here? Because this is almost like an amplification of twofold, going up from Promised Land. Your extra couple of dollars just gets you a massive magnification on a varietal flavor, but also structure and presence and finish in the wines. And the Shiraz that we're looking at is vintage 18, and it is just absolutely singing in the glass for us as we're pouring it there. So that's a fabulous sort of reflection. At the estate level, what we're attempting to do is deliver classic expressions of classic varieties in the Australian mold. So, Australia is not
and I'm going to stop him. That was such a good little quote. Like the structure and the finesse in that wine in and around $20 in the US. I mean, the structure and the finesse, the classic, it's a classic. That's Australia's #1 selling Shiraz, like the Cab, 15 to 20 in Australia. So again, as a sales tool, you just go, I remember I went into ABC in Florida with Jess someone or other. And I can't remember, he either loves Cab or Shiraz. I think he loves Cabs. And I was in a tasting with him and I went, well, here's Australia's #1 selling premium Cab, 15 to 20. And he put it in all his stores. At the end of the day, he said, right, Justin, I'll take that. And he put it in all his stores. You are so on the money when I have to grab Neil Hadley every now and then because what comes out of his mouth is so on the money. But the structure and the finesse of that wine.
Depends on what time of night it is.
Yeah, but for a $20 bottle of wine, that thing's a cracker.
Oh, totally. I mean, really, I and Justin does the same. I travel around the world when I'm allowed to. I stand in wine shows. In Wine Australia stand with 40 other wineries representing, and each of them have got 10 wines on their display stand. So it's 400 Australian wines, and I'm staggered at the amount of visitors in the shows who come back and say, "I just want you to know that thing was amazing," and you guys have got some incredible wines on your stand. There's two things going on. I mean, some of the aspects we've talked about are important. The care in the vineyard. The inventiveness in the winery that Adam brings, and there are a litany of examples of him getting out of bed in the middle of vintage and deciding to run experiments that if you actually stop to think about the financial implications of the risk are just frightening, but he comes away with results that are just stunning. So stuff like the use of chocolate technology to break caps and make softer expressions of wine, which mean they drink earlier and are more satisfying as young wines, is huge. But the other thing that Adam and his team, and he's got a team of about 4 other winemakers that work with them, and he is religious about reminding them of their technical wine making training when it comes to finishing the wines, making certain there are no sulfide or other winery characters that could sit over the smell and the taste of the wine and just take away from the expression of flavor and the expression of place. So we call it polishing. They polish these wines at the end like there is no tomorrow, and they will do that before allowing the wines to finally go to the bottling operation and to get filled into bottles. Where incidentally, we've also spent literally $7 million on a new bottling line to make certain that then there's no gulping of oxygen or air into the wine in bottling. That we've got state of the art. So to preserve, then to capture that point of beauty and preserve it through to bottling and delivery. It's such an easy thing, and you think to yourself, why on earth wouldn't every winemaker on the planet do the same thing? But you guys would know just the same as I. There's so many times you open a bottle and you think, shit, that's just dirty. Why didn't they clean that up properly? Well, that will never be a series of words that flow through your mind when you come to tasting our wines.
I've just opened the 2019 Cabernet in the estate range, and I've had this annoying head cold all week. and I've stayed away from all this. I should have just done a 9 a.m. tasting on Monday, and I'd be clear, because this is clearing my head beautifully. And I'd almost use the term perfume, just the subtlety, the gorgeous subtlety of the perfume of the berries. They're probably redder berries on this one. Our Cabernets do tend to pick up more than the Shiraz. You can sometimes get a little eucalypt sort of flick on them. We've got my younger brother Clinton had to put windbreaks in around the property a decade or two ago, and he went with grey gums, eucalyptus trees. So we've got plenty of those around the vineyard. Sometimes you get that little herbaceous hint. But what I'm loving about then is the smoothness of that. Like it's the perfume is just beautiful and gentle, and then it's the textures over the palate are the same. Drinking beautifully.
Yeah, completely agree. Great mouthful of ripe, I sort of think Ribena cassis, juicy, ripe varietal expression. Cabernet typically, as you would all well know, is expected to hit you with a tannin expression right up front. It has what they were describing my sort of circle of wine people as having good shoulders is the English way of saying it. Really nice framing of square, firm tannins, and bad Cabernet will do that. It'll express that tannin and that then nothing else. You just get this bitter, really hard work experience. But good Cabernet and great Cabernet is all about the nanosecond that divides your brain from deciding it doesn't like that to the wash of flavors that actually follow through and overwhelm that bitterness and that dryness and that framing with this sort of gushing, perfect, beautiful sort of wave of flavor. And that's what's going on with this wine. You've got that immediate expression of structure, but followed by this fabulous expression of flavor. And I like Clare Valley, and it's not the same as Coonawarra, it's not the same as Margaret River, but it has that beautiful cassis and sort of tomato leaf hints at the back, but that really sort of brambly and cassis fruit expression, which to my mind is actually somewhat reminiscent of Napa and California Cabernets. So it should be a flavor that's familiar with your customers and your consumers. We will keep moving.
We'll keep moving. I'm one of 6 kids. It's the Catholic breeding problem, well and truly on display. And Brady bunch, 3 boys and 3 girls. And I think my father. Look, I know he loves us all, and as my mother so famously once said, "Oh no, I absolutely love you all without question. Doesn't mean I have to like you all." But my father, I know he loves the 6 of us, but by jingo, he loves that Cabernet. I mean, that's his baby, like he's so proud to drink that estate Cabernet any single day of the week. Okay, so now we're going to roll into St Andrews.
And Justin, I actually think we had a question. Dave Schilling, if you wanted to go ahead and jump in.
Dave, do.
I was wondering why the alcohol content was not listed on any of the estate wines, at least for the vintages that we received, versus that of the Promised Land. And so I was just wondering why the alcohol content wasn't anywhere on the labels.
Well, I'll let Jeff Sidran answer that from where he sits in Americas, because I'm obviously not looking at your labels. I'm looking at Australian labels, and every region of the world has a different labeling legal regime. Somewhere on the front or the back, there absolutely should be an expression of alcohol. Yeah, so on the bottles in front of us, we can see that.
Found it.
Yeah, it's right there.
Well, it's very tiny. But
Yeah, it's tiny.
I didn't have my glasses on. I apologize.
Yeah. I've just found it. It's right there on the back label, as we would say, in the fine print.
14%, yes.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad it's there, because that otherwise would be a non-compliant label, which could cause everybody to run around screaming. But we
Very compliant.
Yeah, they are completely compliant with whatever the law says it has to be in terms of exactly how many millimeters and so forth.
So what we're doing with the ranges, we're trying to give you guys wines that are distinctly different at each range. Promised Land's your introduction. I talked about fruit expression, beautifully made ones, but lovely voluptuous fruit in that. Then the estate range is the history capsule, and then the winemaking really starts to reflect that journey, the Bordelese coming over here, beautifully made. Then we go into St Andrews. St Andrews in the mid
90s.
In the 90s, late 90s, the family purchased the St Andrews vineyards that were adjacent to our vineyards in the Clare Valley. St Andrews, dating back to 1893, I think it is. I could be wrong, but I think it dates back to then. And then we were then the custodians of this amazing vineyards and winery, to which we've restored. We get fruit off them, some of our best fruit actually, and we've restored aspects of this winery down there. So what we then decided was St Andrews was going to be our best. So it's the best off the vineyard. I would say sometimes slightly more robust, more powerful wines in the St Andrews range with more finesse. But that, if you look at it, Promised Land, your introduction wines, estate, your history capsule, and what the 5 decades of winemaking has delivered to the world. And then St Andrews, the best off those vineyards, slightly more robust. Hand it to you, Neil.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much exactly where we sort of took off in the 1990s. It's sort of funny, the land that was inherited or purchased had been vineyard, as Justin was saying, back in the 1800s, had a history of excellence. Bill Taylor always had his eye on that land, and the family next door wouldn't sell out for years and years, but in the 90s they sold the land, and Bill and the team began a process of re-establishing vineyard through that. So you're now talking about blocks which are 20 to 25 years of age, so in a state of grace as far as vine maturity goes, but also in terms of the absolute aspect, the combination of where the land lies, its orientation towards sunshine, and the deep sort of soil, red soil beds. It's a very, very beautiful part of the estate. And so the St Andrews idea was, these are the best blocks, they're going to give us our best fruits. During the winter time, we'll prune our vines accordingly to reduce the potential crop load and maximize the potential crop quality. And that identification of best from vintage will then come and be brought into the winery and ultimately matured and bottled as St Andrews. We're not absolutely hidebound by that. St Andrews as a label now more broadly represents the very best by variety of the vintage. So if a block elsewhere on the estate in a particular year comes through with stunning fruit, we're not so silly as to ignore that. So the selection substantially is from that part, the northern part of the estate where the St Andrews land was, but the label St Andrews now is a badge that signals the very best that the vintage gave us. And we will explain how that then evolved into a higher order in the form of visionary. Yeah. But for nearly 20 years, St Andrews then stood as the absolute top of the pyramid for our operation. And what you've got in here is we're looking at the Shiraz first, and then we'll move into the Cabernet. The Shiraz, I mentioned Adam doing mad things in the middle of vintage. This is one of those. It's not in this deck, but if you scroll through our website, you'll come across a picture of him with the barrels on end, the top off the barrel, and a fermentation going on in barrel and him hand plunging. Well, this Shiraz is that project. And he literally, in the middle of vintage, some at least 10, maybe more years ago, but at least 10 years ago, literally got up in the middle of vintage and thought, I know what to do to get better integration, because he was getting massive power and massive expression out of these vineyard blocks for his Shiraz. And he was struggling to integrate that scale and that power with his barrels. And he thought, I know what to do. What I need to do is get a cooper into the winery to knock the heads out of the barrels and stand them on end and fill the bungs, and then actually do the fermentation in barrel instead of then doing the usual big tank fermentation and move into barrel for maturation. Now, when you consider the barrel costs about $1,000, And when you consider that he did put about 50 barrels over to this project, that's a $50,000 gamble that our chief winemaker took off his own volition. And I think he spent about 3 months scratching his chin as to when he was actually going to tell Mitchell Taylor and the accountants that they'd done this. But as it turned out, it was a gamble that paid handsomely, because what he got as a consequence of that was what he refers to, I think, as massive elegance. It's this contradiction of size and balance that he's striving for at this level, particularly with the masculinity, the sheer power that comes in the St Andrews expression. He's seeking an almost impossible idea, which is massive scale and yet perfect, elegant balance. And that's what's going on with this Shiraz.
I laughed. I think I was in Shanghai at a tasting, and I was with this gorgeous Frenchman who sat next to me, as only the French can do, and said, "No, Justin, I cannot drink Australian Shiraz. This is not red wine. This is not wine." And I didn't strangle him, garrote him, anything like that. Didn't rugby tackle him, anything like that. And I said, "Oh, look, stayed calm. Why don't you just try my St Andrews Shiraz?" And which I don't think the French are great at giving compliments to others. And he came back to me at the end of the evening and said, "Justin, I'm gonna revisit Australian Shiraz off the back of having your St Andrews Shiraz." And he just said the power was there in that wine, but the elegance, the length and the elegance of that wine. And sometimes, I guarantee you will do tastings with this wine around the world, as I've had the joy of doing. Neil has for 14 years, me for 24. And every now and then you have to say to yourself, it's a Shiraz. You have to, that's a Shiraz. The power of the wine is there. And I got it on the nose straight away. Going from the estate Shiraz to that Shiraz, I got it at hello. You knew that was a more powerful wine. But then you get this elegance and this length of this wine, and you have to keep reminding yourself that's an Australian Shiraz. So it's great winemaking. It's the climate that we've got, and it is what it is.
Yeah. I know you guys don't actually want to. Can you just pass me the bottle? You guys don't, because America is not into medals and shit. But that is the medal count that this wine has picked up in the wine show circuit around the world, because wine judges, when they're tasting in blind tastings, respond to this in that manner. So it's exciting stuff, and it's really a pleasure to be able to show them and taste them. I'm going to, variously, in terms of people try to sort of struggle with that contradiction, that massive elegance. Variously, analogies that spring to mind are sumo wrestling is really important one. Those guys have balance. They look big, but my God, you try tipping them over, they are perfectly balanced dudes. So it's a sumo wrestler. If you think that, I think also about elephants doing ballet. It's this contradiction of ideas, and yet through the proof in the glass, it is entirely possible. We're going to move on to the Cabernet, and this really is getting into the zone where, as with the St Andrews Shiraz, we're selecting best fruits. We're also investing fairly significantly into barrel quality. So barrels, just like wine is not wine, you pay your money and you take your choice. The same is true in the cooperage world. And even with your cooper of choice, they'll sell you their $1,000 barrel, or they'll sell you their $4,000 barrel. And that's all to do with the weathering, the aging of the staves, and the cooperage itself, and the selection of the absolute very best forests for wood. So when we get to this sort of level for St Andrews Cabernet, we did try fermenting St Andrews Cabernet in barrel, and we do actually now have some very specialized barrels called pearls that we do some Cabernet in barrel fermentation with, but not to the extent that we do the Shiraz. The Shiraz in barrel fermentation works fabulously for American oak and Shiraz. Adam found it a little bit too much from a Cabernet point of view. So we tend to ferment this in tank and then put it into barrel. But the barrels we put it into are top of the range Rolls-Royce selection barrels, which then aromatically, particularly again for sommeliers and people who know their wine, who are making decisions based on what they smell in the moment, aromatically those top of the end barrels trigger a recognition, that combination of the smell of the best of French oak with the best of Cabernet as a variety is that I call it sort of seaweed and black olives, but it's a trigger aroma that causes them to say, I'm smelling and tasting quality. So that's part of what goes on with this wine. We age the wines basically for 3 years before we release them. We're looking at 2017. I'm not quite sure which vintage you guys have got in your glasses. 17 same over that, great. 17 was a light vintage by Australian standards. It was a cool vintage. And I would not describe this as a light wine. So enjoy this and enjoy selling this. I know that you had a great result with the guys over in California, selling, I think, 500 dozen of this wine over there. But this and its sister, the estate, the St. Andrews Shiraz, these are both the 17s. When the 18s turn up, they'll take you up a notch in terms of depth and intensity. But where we stand with this, there is that beautiful expression, that harmony, the cigar box tobacco, black olive, seaweed expression that is that combination of French oak and Cabernet. And that follows through then into this brilliant expression of flavor, complexity. And it's here that we get to talk about what I love, one of the best French expressions is the notion of vinosity. I mean, what a crazy idea. It's a completely undefinable. I don't know if a dictionary could give, it tastes like wine. It has vinosity. It tells you nothing, and yet it tells you everything. This is the real deal in terms of a complete expression of quality Cabernet.
Yeah. I think the joy for me in the 4 years in the US on these wines, and you as a team at Taub will get it, is, and I remember when I started at I do remember when I started 24 years ago, and I was very green to this, and I was like, what if someone rips the shit out of these wines? What if someone says, the wines are crap? And 24 years later, and it has happened to me, I think twice. One was in New York with an immensely obnoxious guy in New York who was all about old world and just literally. And then I remember at the time that the sales guy I was with, or girl I was with, said to me, "Well, do look at the New World set in the store. There is none." And I went, "Oh, great. Okay, that was a bit of a setup." But what you can go in with such confidence is that the quality of wine is always backing you up. If you taste these wines with anybody, and I've done those 4 years in the US, and the wines were so well received that the quality of the winemaking is just there all the way. And on that point, now we get to move to the Visionary, which is fantastic. So with the Visionary and the Legacy, we then go up and we do something that's quite unusual at Wakefield Wines. What we do is, if St. Andrews is our, for the want of a better word, our PowerPoint, where the power of the wine is on for all to see, then with the Visionary, we actually go more elegant. So a lot of wine companies around the world, as you go up through those price tiers, the wines will get bigger, the oak will get bigger, the alcohol will get bigger, a lot of things will get bigger, particularly in New World. With us, we've gone, and very true to that first trip back in the 60s when we went over to Bordeaux, and my father wanted elegance, and he was in love with Bordeaux. I think my mother was in love with some French winemakers, but that's another story. But the elegance that what we are then pursuing in this wine, that from St. Andrews, Neil will talk about this in detail, but from St. Andrews comes the Visionary. From St. Andrews Cabernet, obviously, comes the Visionary, and it's the most elegant parcel of St. Andrews then gets worked and reworked, and we get this more elegant wine right at the top of the tier.
Yeah, one thing I will say, a hot tip, actually this is true for basically the last 5 wines in the tasting. But for this wine in particular, do yourselves a favor after you've done this tasting and put the cap back on that particular bottle and let it sit. And enjoy it on your Friday night, having had a 24-hour breathing with the cap off and a bit of air in that bottle, because this is a wine that at a sommelier level rewards decanting and rewards breathing. The way that we're doing this is pretty straightforward. We put St Andrews into the best barrels and we lie it down after vintage in barrel for a year to mature. And that represents about the midpoint in the barrel maturation of St Andrews. So St Andrews will spend 2 years in a barrel and then another year in bottle prior to being released to market, typically in a sales so production and then selling operation. With the Visionary, what we do at the 1 year point in the St Andrews program is that Adam and his team of winemakers pull every barrel and go through and sample every single barrel in the program. And they make a separation. And the separation, as Justin has just alluded, is not based on power, but is based on elegance. And those barrels that for no fathomable reason are expressing tighter, more reserved, more elegant manifestations of variety and style get pulled out at that point. And it's about 10% of the St Andrews make. They get pulled out, they get put into a blending tank to obviously create one wine. And that new single wine is then put back into new barrels for a further 12 maturation. So we are double barreling and we are selecting for elegance and subtlety. And the logical expectation from that process would be that you put one on top of the other and you get a much bigger oak expression. And the reality, as Michel Rolland and many of the great wineries of Medoc will swear and attest, is that the process has this effect of swallowing itself. And I cannot actually technically explain why, but what logically should mean a much more oaky expression of the wine, in fact, becomes a more folded in and stitched in expression of tightness and poise. And that's what we get in the Visionary. When I was first hawking the Visionary, the 2009 vintage was first vintage we made of this wine, and I had it in California. I was trying to sell it to Old Bridge Cellars. In fact, the buggers wouldn't take us on, but that's a different story from a different era. But
we landed happier.
I think Rob Bonner would live to regret that decision because we did sit down at dinner. I was at lunch, and I was trying to sell the winery. This is a point in time when nobody else was looking at us. And we had the Visionary and we poured it, and he was kind of sniffy and cursory about his tasting of it, and then munched our way through the very nice lunch he laid on. And at the end of it, we poured another glass, and he literally fell off his chair. And he did say, look, do you mind if I take the rest of this bottle home, because I really need to look at this in the next 48 hours. So it's nice when somebody gives you that compliment. He still didn't buy the bloody wines, but that is, as Justin alludes, to your great good fortune that we didn't sort of set our stall up with them, and we now have ourselves set up with you. I hope the wines, apart from the fact that Justin and I have spoken now for just over an hour without really drawing breath. So we have been speaking for the wines, but I hope that the wines themselves have been speaking for themselves, because ultimately the best salesman you've got is right there in your glass. So for God's sake, get out and sample those wines and show the right wines to the right target customers. For our points, it's now just gone 6:16, I think, in your language at night. So we are a little over time, and my apologies for that. But we'll certainly be happy to take any questions if anybody has any questions, and we can otherwise let you enjoy the rest of your evenings because that is pretty much the last thing we want to say. Anything you want to?
No, look, it's exciting, guys. We cannot wait to get over there and work with you guys. We're all. I love Australia. I love Australia, but I've had a hell of a lot of good times in my life in the US of A, selling wine. So keen to get over with you guys as a team and do it all. But let fly with the questions. Anything you want to know now, we'd be happy to field those questions.
Actually, before we dig in too much into questions, Rebecca, did you have a marketing component that you wanted to share with the team as well? Neil and Justin, we have the divisional managers on who manage each region for us. And I think one of the things that, we're keen on is launching and providing, obviously, in addition to the amazing wines we just tried, which, wow, what an eye opener, right? But I mean, in addition to that, I think I want to make sure that they have any kind of the cool marketing tools and POS that you guys have provided, because that'll certainly go hand in hand with writing some big incentives and building meaningful distribution as we get out there in the second quarter of this year. So Rebecca, I'll leave it to you if you want to share that, or even if you wanted to put it in the Teams chat so the DMs could access it after. I think that would be tremendously helpful. Oh, you're on mute. I'm sorry.
There's like two screens, so it's hard to know, and I might have an echo. Apologies. But yes, absolutely. I'll put it in the Teams chat. They have incredible tools, and I think you'll be excited to see it.
Very cool. Well, then, team, I'll open it up to you guys to ask any questions you might have about the wines, anything about the winemaking philosophy. I know we're excited to have you guys come here as much as you guys are too. We're ready. We need some folks to join us from abroad. It's been a while. So team, go ahead if you have anything you wanted to ask.
They've all gone all shy. I mean, we've noticed you guys in America. You're very shy and retiring people. You very rarely storm your own capital. But then again, we might have just talked you all to death.
I'll just make a couple comments. A lot of great information here. I can't wait to re-watch this recording again and pick up more and more nuggets as I rewatch it. The wines taste fantastic. There's a lot of opportunity here, and I think you guys said it. We just gotta present the wine to the right customer and the right target account, and we're gonna, as long as we keep a focused approach, we're gonna be really happy with the success that we can start to have with this portfolio and the quality of these wines. And I'm in California, and I mean, come on, the things that people had knocks against Australia 10 years ago, well, that's Paso Robles today. So, I mean, take that for what it is. These wines are elegant, they're beautiful, they've got a great profile. Thank you guys for the education, and we'll definitely shoot you questions as they come about. And if we can get this link, Kristen, have my team watch it too on their time, I mean, would be really great to utilize for some distributor presentations as well. So thank you so much, guys, for taking the time to do this for us.
Thank you, Michael.
And Michael, dial in, like, again, we're really realistic. Like, this is a team thing. Like, I know we're a long way away, but we're right in there with you guys shoulder to shoulder. So as those opportunities come up through Jeff, who's on the ground with you in the US, just the opportunities come up and what you might need at store to make it work. At the end of the day, in my 4 years in the US, what I found was it was never the product. The product was like, God, this product's unreal. The only Achilles heel was, hey, I just haven't heard of this brand. And I have to admit, in the years I was in the US, the category was also pretty tricky. The Aussie category had, been climbing incredible heights and had come off. But that's historic now. It's on a rebuild. But we're really realistic about, shout out to us through Jeff what tools you need to get the job done, to get those listings. And you've got a very proactive, very aware business behind you that'll give you the tools to get the job done and get over the line and get the listings. And then once you get the listings, to pull it through, whether it's tasting programs, advertising programs, whatever it is. You know, we all know getting the sale, what would you say? Getting the sale is a third of the deal.
Right.
Pulling it through and getting the repeat sale, I know it's one of Jim Galtieri's favorites. It's actually the second order that's the most satisfying because you've pulled it through. And we're really realistic about that. We've lived the US over the last 20 years, but you guys are going to be our lead. You're going to be our voice. You're going to be our legs on the street. We just want to back you up all the way.
Yeah.
Guys, speaking to that too, I mean, those of you that are East Coast folks and have Wegmans in your markets, I know we've mentioned it quite a few times. Mike, it'd be the equivalent of your AVP. I mean, for us, it's a major chain and one that we've struggled to get into because it's hard to find the right price to quality ratio for them. This, I mean, I can tell you, I've been after that account for the last 4 years, and this is what broke down the door. In addition to that, now that it's there, you're going to have some strong Nielsen trends and new data that's coming out from their sales that'll launch in April 1. So it's a good story to tell your other accounts. You've got a behemoth buying it, so you can say, listen, if Wegmans is keen on carrying it, there's no reason you shouldn't be as well. So make sure to use those data points as you're selling. And I have to tell you, these guys have been incredibly flexible with what we needed to get it done. So, you know, whether it's a chain opportunity, regional or national, or even if it's just a big player in the independent, you know, I think, and I hope I'm not speaking for you both, but if there's sales meetings that you want them to attend and kick off, I mean, clearly there's some charisma here, so it'd be kind of fun to have them on with the sales folks. But don't be shy about asking. I mean, this is something we want to do successfully together.
And to Justin's point,
yeah,
I'm sorry, hold on. Just to Justin's point, we do have a lot of stuff built in already regarding store level, some stuff for wholesale level, which Rebecca will share with you in her things there. That we do have a lot of built-in stuff that for your usage for the launch.
Guys, they even have wine fridges, which is so cool for incentives or even store incentives. I mean, those are things that we don't usually get our hands on.
So we're good.
So Neil, if I could provide a kind of closing comment, if you will. A salesperson always looks for what is the point of difference between what they're selling and what the market or the category is all about. Aside from the spectacular operation and the attention to detail and all that, your wines are among, if not the most elegant Australian wines I've ever tasted. That is what brought me to the brand. You know, the majority of Australian wines, even the ones with great medals and notoriety, can be overpowering and too alcoholic or whatever. I find the Wakefield wines so well integrated. They're so European in many ways. I heard a lot of Bordeaux here and climate similarities. That is what the case is. So at the end of the day, whether we're talking about Promised Land all the way up to St. Andrews, the drinkability of every category, I think, puts you at the top of the category. And I think if the sales personnel keep that in mind, it is a point of difference for sure, for sure.
Thank you, Jim. That and that's important because it's quite nice with the guy who built Lafite in America to be making that connection across to us. Thank you for that because it's important to us. It's what we feel that the climate of Clare allows us to take that route, and just because you've got that option doesn't mean you take it. So we feel that we've done a great job with the family of backed that over decades now on this journey to seek that expression of elegance. Just to echo what was just said, if you guys regionally with your teams or with your distributors want both of us or one of us to be part of that, pick your moments, because there will come a point where we sort of start to wave the white flag if you've got us every second morning. But yeah, by all means, pick your moments, and if you want us to come in and help you do a launch out of this nature with the team regionally, if you think that's what will help you to break the back of this thing, then we're right there. We do also around the world set up buyer tastings, particularly in this COVID time, but actually pre-COVID, when we've got key customers, if they actually want to understand the wine, they might have 3 or 4 wines they want to talk about. It may not be the whole range, but we can set up Zooms or tastings by video, whether it's us or whether it's direct to the winemaker. Adam on Zoom it's almost like taking drugs in terms of a sort of experiential moment. Adam just will take you to strange places in his mind in a wine tasting, but it's fabulous because you can find yourself in his moment, and he'll inevitably be on the deck at St Andrews with the sun going down, and you'll taste through wine. He'll explain things that couldn't possibly be picked up off the website or a PowerPoint presentation. So you guys figure out the opportunities, and we will absolutely back you up.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Beautiful wines.
Cool.
This was amazing, and thank you so much, Neil and Justin, for your time and for hopping on first thing. I know you taste these wines frequently, but it's nice to start the day and clear your head cold, I think. And team, thank you so much for your attention and participating in this. I think we're all really excited, and I think just tasting through this together, we see the real opportunity here. So for any follow-up at all, ideas or questions, reach out to us, reach out to Jeff, and we'll connect everybody as needed and put it all together.
Good luck to everybody at Tao. We're excited to work with you, and just good luck. Be confident. Go out there and nail those sales. Good luck,
forward to
everybody.
seine you stateside sometime soon.
We look
Thanks,
forward
guys.
to it as well. Thanks, guys. Have a great night or morning.
Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.
Take care now.
Bye.